Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Delivery Driver by Fantastic Wonder. I live alone in a small apartment. I work from home, so I don't get out much, and most of my interactions with the outside world are through deliveries. Groceries, takeout, packages. It's convenient, but it also means I rely on strangers coming to my door. There is this one delivery driver, though, who started to make me uneasy. He's an older guy with a thin, almost gaunt face and eyes that seem to linger a little too long. He never says much, just a curt "delivery for George," and then he's gone. Everything started with small things. He'd occasionally make a comment about something he saw through my window, like, "Nice view of the park," or "You have a lot of plants." Harmless enough, but it did feel intrusive. Then he started showing up at odd hours, not just during the usual delivery windows, but late at night or early in the morning. Each time he'd claim it was a rescheduled delivery or a system error, but it always seemed to coincide with when I was alone. One time, he brought a package that I hadn't ordered, and I told him that there must be a mistake, but he insisted it was for me, that it had my name and address on it. So I reluctantly took it, and when I opened it up, it was just a small unmarked box. There was nothing inside. That night, I started noticing things. Small things, like a light flickering that I hadn't noticed before, or a faint scratching sound coming from the hallway. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I started checking my security cameras more frequently, and I noticed that the delivery driver would sometimes pause outside my door, just standing there for a few seconds before ringing the bell. He'd also linger in the hallway after leaving, looking around like he was trying to see inside. One evening, I was watching TV when I heard a knock at the door. I looked at the security camera, and it was him. He was holding a small paper bag, and I didn't answer. He knocked again, harder this time. I could hear him muttering something under his breath. I still didn't answer. After a few more minutes, he finally left, but I could see him on the camera walking slowly down the hallway, looking back at my door. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking the security cameras, watching for any sign of him. I even put a chair against the door just in case. The next morning, I found a note that had been slipped under my door. It was written in a messy, almost childlike scrawl. It said, "I know you're in there." That's when I called the police. They took my statement, but they said there wasn't much they could do without any evidence of a crime. Oh, I've changed my delivery address to a P.O. box. I've installed extra locks on my door, but I still can't shake the feeling that that guy is still watching me, that he knows where I am, and that someday he'll come back. A Deadly Dream, submitted by Daughter of Earth. When I was about 13, I ran away from home and was staying with friends in Saskatoon. Now, I can't say they were good people, as they had their problems, but for some reason they had befriended me and let me stay with them. And that was amazing, as they were all much older and could have gotten into lots of trouble by doing that. Well, my best buddy and street brother at the time was a guy called Sea-Dog. He'd just turned 18 and had just gotten out of juvie. He was the kind of guy who always had a smile on his rugged face no matter what, and he looked out for me like a bigger brother would. At that time, Everyone was on drugs and going crazy, and I ended up getting picked up and put into a low-security home for runaways. Not even 3 days later, I saw a headline in the local paper: 3 caught in kidnapping plot, 2 still sought. Well, the 2 they were looking for were Sea-Dog and his girlfriend, Denny. Of course, I took off looking for them to help them get out of town or whatever. And the first place I stopped was at the apartment, which still had crime scene taped across the battered door. It didn't take much to get it open. I went inside and retrieved my journal and the deck of tarot cards that had been a gift for me from Sea-Dog. He, of course, wasn't there. But as it happened, I got picked up outside by a cop who recognized me. But much to my surprise, there in the back of the paddy wagon was Sea-Dog on the other side of the divider. His trademark smile was missing, and honestly, he looked really sad. I tried to assure him that all would be well and that I would visit him, of course, but we didn't have long to talk. In the time that we did, he told me what had happened and how he had walked in on a kidnapping in progress by 3 of his so-called friends, and they ended up forcing him to stay there. With his past record, he knew a long jail sentence was ahead of him. They took him off to court and deposited me back at the home, and at that point it seemed like that was that. But it wasn't. About 4 days later, I fell asleep to the sound of rain on my window and the Doors singing Riders on the Storm. Suddenly, I was outside of Sea-Dog's prison cell, and he was sitting in there on a cot with a rope made from ripped and braided bedsheets. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, and I tried to comfort him, but he couldn't see me. I helplessly watched as he hung himself, and then it seemed like he was looking right at me. I woke up, and it was already morning. I was kind of shaken up about the dream, but I didn't think much about it until 10 minutes after I got up. A counselor came to my room saying that I had a phone call. The call was from Charlotte, the planner of the whole kidnapping and my now ex-good friend. She asked if I had heard about Sea-Dog, and I went off on her, saying how could she? He was going to get so long in jail, and she was the reason for that. She said, "Honey, if you're standing, you need to sit down." And then she told me that Sea-Dog had, in fact, hung himself that night. Yeah, just like in my dream where I couldn't save him. Honestly, that screwed me up for a while. And I ran away, and I can't remember what I did for the next 4 months, touring Calgary and Edmonton. One day, a wise woman told me that I shouldn't feel guilty about it. If he had wanted to be saved, he would have seen me or sensed I was there and not done what he had done. None of this was my fault. Anyway, I finally came to grips with all of it not being my fault, regardless of my dream. So kids, my message to you is, it's never a good idea to run away from home. Horrible things can happen, and running away doesn't fix anything. Despite your situation, no matter how rotten it is, try to find help from someone who will take care of you closer to home. Don't stay in a dangerous situation, but don't take off halfway across the country like I did. Take it from one who knows. Don't Go Down That Road by Blue 13 Coyote. It was a late spring evening in our little town. A group of us delinquents had gathered to drink a few beers and discuss what kind of stupidness we were going to commit that evening. Not really a group of tight friends, just whoever congregated outside the Dairy Queen. Whatever we were going to do, it would probably involve some kind of law being broken. Someone piped up and suggested that we go to the academy. We'd all heard stories about the place, but none of us had actually been there or even believed the stories about it being a gathering place for the occult when the academy closed for the summer. I'm not going to lie. I wasn't feeling this one. It seemed like there were too many people jumping in. There were a few people who decided to go that I barely knew, and there were 3 or 4 loads of people in pickup trucks, but my small group would be going in a car. Not the best choice for that kind of trespassing. Along with me was my buddy Jess. I'd known him for a few years. And then there was Alex. I didn't know him all that well. He was a state wrestling champ in high school, kind of a 230-pound goofball. And then there was Roy. He was a couple of years older than the other 3 of us, and my friend Lee had recently said that we were kind of assholes because we would just use Roy to buy us beer. I mean, I had always assumed Roy had a life and wouldn't want to hang out with us. And unfortunately for him, he decided to that night. We arrived at the entrance of the academy, and I expected a locked gate, but it was wide open. My car was kind of loud, so I parked about halfway down the quarter-mile drive, and we walked with another group, but the trucks just drove on in. Honestly, I was a little surprised by the size of the place. We all ended up on the south side of the property, and there was a little house that was a schoolroom. Nothing was locked. We just walked on in. The place looked like it was frozen in time, like something that hadn't been used in 20 years. This was the only building we entered. Now, we may have been doing some illegal stuff, but we had no intention of vandalizing anything. We walked out and headed up one of the roads towards another building, and another group went another way. Picture a couple of small pickup trucks and others walking with the trucks. I didn't like the idea of them driving in there like that. Vehicles tend to make way too much noise, but there were some girls with us who didn't want to walk. As we walked towards the second building, my thoughts were, I've seen enough, let's go. Those idiots in the trucks are going to get us in trouble. I told Roy and Alex we're going. Jess had split off and gone with the other group. As we walked on the path, I saw one of the trucks flying down towards us. They slid to a stop and told us that we needed to go. They saw people through a window on the north end, and that they were all wearing robes in a candlelit building, and that we had been spotted. You know how people act when they're genuinely scared. Those guys sped off, and the second truck came down, flying by us, yelling for us to get out. They didn't even bother to slow down. We just saw people in the backs of the trucks bouncing around the bumpy path. After a moment of panic about what to do, we all started running. But then we heard the voices coming towards us. At that point, they were far enough away that we couldn't make out what they were saying. And then I could hear an ATV coming. We were cut off. We were in a wooded area about 400 feet long between 2 paths that merged together on both ends. The others had escaped out a back way to the south end, but my car was parked off the side of the main entrance. It didn't matter. Whoever these people were, they were closing in quickly. We just laid down in the woods, not even 15 feet from one of the paths, hoping that we could find a way out. I heard 2 people walk right past us on the path. They weren't speaking. I don't even remember what time it was, probably around 10:30 or so on a moonless night. It was dark, so dark that I couldn't even see the other 2 laying right beside me. I figured if they went towards the back exit, maybe we had a chance to go towards my car. But then I also thought the cops are probably on their way. That's when we heard the dogs, and I thought, this is bad. Keep in mind, this was a time before cell phones. We were completely cut off unless we could get to the car. But what if they had already spotted my car? We were screwed. As the dogs got closer, I whispered to the others to cover themselves in leaves. I mean, the leaves were thick, plenty thick to hide completely. And that's when Alex began crying. Yeah, the state wrestling champ, crying. I was telling the guy to just be quiet, but he kept whimpering about us going to jail. By that point, it was pretty clear that whoever these people were not calling the police. They intended to deal with us on their own. I asked Alex if he wanted to die, because that's what was probably going to happen if they found us. We finally got him under control, and we just lay there, covered in leaves. Oh, did I mention the ants? Minutes turned into an hour, and every time it seemed like they were gone, we would hear them or the dogs. Then I heard my car start. I'd left the keys in it so I wouldn't lose them. They got my car. But then I heard it leaving, not going towards us. And then I could hear it going through the gears on the highway. What the hell? Now I had no idea how we were going to get out. The patrol didn't stop either. Every few minutes, a truck or an ATV or people walking with the dogs came by. The dogs got so close once I thought one was going to step right on us. At what I think was about 2 a.m., I thought to myself, if the sun comes up, we're in trouble. The cover of darkness was our only hope. But how would we silently get 3 people out? The crunching of leaves alone would alert the dogs. Then I realized I didn't even know where the hell we really were in relation to the entrance and the exit. The place had a lot of acres, and it was in a pretty secluded area. A couple of more hours went by, and I considered running alone. I knew Roy would follow. I knew Alex would get caught, and I couldn't do that to him. But I knew it wouldn't be long before the sky became lighter. A few minutes later, a light rain began to fall, and that is what we needed. The rain would mask the sound of the leaves crunching. I whispered to Roy that it was time. He relayed the message to Alex, and it felt good to finally stand up after hours of laying there. I looked carefully to make sure there was no one close by, at least for the moment, and we'd have to walk the path south at least 1,000 feet before there was any more cover. We slowly stepped onto the path and started walking at a brisk pace. And Alex wanted to talk. We kept having to tell him to be quiet. About halfway down the path to the next cover, I saw headlights. Oh shit, I thought, and we hit the deck in the grass beside the path. It was a small car, and it turned away from us, then started backing down the path. I was momentarily confused, and as it backed up at a high rate of speed, I recognized the taillights. It was Lee in his Honda CRX, and I yelled out, "Lee!" He popped the hatch open and yelled back, "Hurry, get in!" The 3 of us sprinted down that path, and I could hear the dogs again, then saw headlights behind us. 3 full-size adults jumped in the hatch of that CRX, legs hanging out, as Lee sped out the back way. I couldn't believe it. It was so close to dawn. Once we were well clear of the academy, we got out of the car, and I was like, "How did you know? How did you find us?" Lee said he thought he had seen my car driving through town late, and he turned around to get the car to stop, and it was Jess in my car. The guy had gotten out of the back of one of the trucks and then came back and got my car. And I was pretty mad about that for a long time. He knew we hadn't got out and just took off in the only way we had out. But, of course, if he hadn't, the car might have been discovered. But I still couldn't believe he just left us out there, and a chance encounter with Lee was all that saved us. For years this story got told. I never wanted to go near the place again, and I don't know anyone who ever did. I don't know who those people were or what they were doing, but it completely fit the stories we had heard about the place. I haven't seen Alex or Roy since that year, and Jess died a few years ago. I do run into Lee every now and then. Creepy Man on Our Lawn by Juice WRLD Fan. This is something that happened to me when I was around 7 years old, and it's been on my mind a lot lately. I wanted to share it because it's one of those memories that never fully left me, even if it's a little blurry now. So my younger brother, who was 6 at the time, and I were hanging out in my bedroom. We were on my bed eating candy and watching YouTube on our iPad. Pretty much what we did every chance we got back then. Our house had 2 stories, and my room had a window facing the front yard. And at some point, I think I was the one who glanced outside, and that's when I saw him. There was an old man standing on our lawn smoking a cigarette. I don't remember what he was wearing, but I can still picture him standing near the porch. The thing is, I could only see him from the side. I never fully saw his face. But this is the part that really shook me. I knew for a fact that our front door hadn't been locked. My siblings and I were supposed to lock the door when we got home from school, but we almost never did because we live in a safe neighborhood, and nothing bad ever happened there, so it didn't seem like a big deal, until it suddenly was. My brother and I freaked out and immediately ran down the hall to our older brother's room. He was probably around 14 or 15 at the time and completely absorbed in his Xbox. We burst in, scared and desperate for him to help, and told him what we had seen. And you know what he did? Absolutely nothing. I remember he seemed confused at first, but then he shrugged it off and told us it was probably one of our dad's friends, which, thinking back, made 0 sense. I don't even remember if I brought it up to my dad, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't one of his friends. And if it was, he would have reassured me back then, and I feel like I wouldn't still be unsettled about it. My older brother didn't lock the door, didn't check to see if the guy was still there, and definitely didn't grab anything for protection. He just wanted to get back to his game. He reassured us in the laziest way possible, then kicked us out of his room. And because we were little kids who trusted him, we tried to convince ourselves that everything was fine. We didn't look out the window again. Honestly, we were too scared. We ended up hiding under the covers in my room and pretended like it never happened. We just went back to watching YouTube. Nothing bad happened that day. There was no break-in, no scary aftermath. But to this day, I wonder who that man was and why he was there. A part of me wishes I could go back and demand a real answer from my older brother, but at this point, I doubt he even remembers it. So, yeah, that's the story. And the moral of it all? Maybe just lock your doors. Safe neighborhood or not, you never know who might show up on your lawn. And to the man, whoever you were, let's not meet again. When the Snow Fell by SSGT Ghost. I, a male of 21, was born and raised in the state of Maine. I've lived near the coast, in the city, and for the past 2 years I've been living in the middle of the woods with my grandparents. A very desolate spot between 2 semi-populated towns in central Maine, with little to no neighbors. It is undeniably beautiful. I've been coming to this exact house since I was born, and I've always noticed something off about the woods. Never felt a feeling of danger, just that I was being observed. Over the years, I had grown accustomed to it and forgot about it after I had moved during the pandemic. But now, it's back. I noticed it during my first night sleeping here. Stacks of boxes still in my new room and shitty curtains hung on the wall haphazardly to ensure a sense of security. At 4:32 a.m., I woke up to what I thought was a radio, right outside my door. The house had an old integrated radio speaker system wired into every room of the house, but it hadn't been connected for 2 decades. As I thought about those radios, I kept listening to what was playing. A genre of music I had never heard sung in a language that I didn't recognize. I had heard tales of Wendigo and skinwalkers here in Maine, and a recently released YouTube horror series wasn't helping my paranoia. I kept listening, and at exactly 5:30 a.m., the noises stopped and the sun rose. I'd never felt so scared in that house prior to that moment. Several months passed, and my grandfather got sent to a veterans home due to his worsening condition. So now it was just myself and my grandmother. My grandfather would sometimes mention how he heard music in a language he didn't understand, but I had always associated that with his dementia. My grandmother would hear it too, but I just didn't think much of it. After some time, it was now October of 2024. There was no major activity that disturbed or spooked myself or my grandmother, and all was relatively going well. I had been going on walks down the main road at any time of day and was feeling safe in my environment. In late October, of course, it started to get colder, darker, and overall, everything felt more desolate. I had seen some deer staring at me in my front yard one time, but looking back on it, I'm not exactly sure what those 6 pairs of glowing white dots were. They were too high off the ground to be deer, and I went out and measured relative to the tree they were near, and it was around 11 feet. The snow had started falling, and it kept falling over the coming weeks. The forest got quieter, and the days got shorter. I had heavy night owl tendencies due to my night shifts. I used to work, so I would go to bed anywhere between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. Around mid-November is when the noises started. Light scratching on the siding of the house and slower thumping of heavy rhythmic footsteps outside. When I explored, the tracks I found looked bipedal, with a wide berth. I know bear, moose, deer, and human tracks well. This didn't look like any of those, and I mentioned it to my neighbors, and they just asked me to not talk about it. All they would say back to me was, "Be careful." Now, keep in mind, these people had been living there longer than I'd been alive. So I started doing research and found that the town sat upon old Penobscot tribal land. It was a common place for rituals and burials to be held. The sounds got louder and more invasive. The scratching became more of a carving motion, and the slow steps turned into a heavy and agile run. Whatever it was, it seemed angry. I could sense that whatever was there didn't like me, or at least didn't like what I was. It would scuttle across the roof and bang on the doors. And then one day my grandmother told me she saw it. 2 white glowing eyes outside her window, beaming into her soul from the dark forest at precisely 3 a.m. I immediately burned sage outside and inside the property and made an offering to the spirits of tobacco and chicken bones, in line with local tribal spirituality. All of this sounds like something out of a book or a shitty Netflix drama, I know. But since that day, the weather has warmed up and the noises have stopped. My depression has gotten better and I don't stay up as late anymore. But every now and then I still get that feeling of being observed. And last night, as I passed by my old room across the hall to go to bed, I saw something big dash by outside the window. Shortly after that, we got a winter weather advisory. As the snow paints the landscape white, my anxiety grows. Whatever it is, it doesn't seem to hate me. It just seems to more so tolerate my existence. And all I really know about it is that it gets worse when the snow falls. Bizarre Dreams and Spiritual Warfare, submitted by Sunset Dream. I moved into a new apartment about a year ago, and the first time I entered the place, the whole demeanor of it seemed rather off. I've always been rather in tune with the spirit world, although I've never experienced what I'm experiencing now. The price was right with this apartment, and so was the location, so I moved in. About 3 months after moving in, I saw a white lady in my kitchen doorway coming home from work one morning. I work night shift, and I won't stay there alone. But anyhow, I only saw her out of the corner of my eye. She was rather tall with long hair and was wearing a long nightgown and had slippers on her feet. I also heard from 2 different sources of people that I barely knew, I knew them through friends, that my apartment was known to be haunted and that witches used to gather there to practice magic. I should mention that my apartment complex is over 100 years old. But now here comes the whole dream part of this, which totally scares the shit out of me. I need some real help here with this one, and I hope someone out there has had experiences like this and can help me. When I have these dreams, I actually believe I'm having an out-of-body experience to meet these things. I've seen the lady in white, as I've dubbed her, in my room, and she's standing right next to me, just looking at me, although I could never say anything to her. I felt paralyzed. I could feel myself virtually leaving my body and coming back, like I was looking at myself as I came back into my body before and after I see these ghosts or whatever. I've never experienced anything like this before in my entire life. Other than the white lady, I have had a similar experience with a man in my bathroom, as well as a young boy of about 18, who always is wearing suspenders and has one of those cheesy bowl-cut haircuts. Anytime that I've seen him, he's actually ran towards me with his mouth snarling and his hands held out in a claw-like stance. I got to admit, he's kind of scary. The other kicker with all of this is right when I do see these ghosts or whatever, I feel my whole body vibrating so bad that it hurts. Like I said, I felt like paralyzed, like when your arm falls asleep and it's trying to come back to you. I feel that sensation from my head to my toes, and I actually feel it right after I wake up. And I always wake up immediately afterwards in a state of shock. These experiences, whether they're dreams or out-of-body experiences, always happen and only happen in my apartment. Like I'm actually awake, and everything is always in the same place, like my furniture, clothes, everything. My last experience with this happened 2 days ago, when I was out in my parking lot rooting through my car, and a man was behind me and he called out, "Hey!" I turned around to see a tall man wearing a tan shirt. He had a big gut and was wearing jeans. And I felt the whole body vibration thing starting to course through my body. And I looked to my right and saw a black demon-like thing coming right at me. And this was happening at nighttime, and for some reason, after many counts of this happening to me, I did finally figure out that I could semi-control the whole experience. So I said to myself, "No, you're not doing this to me," repeatedly. And finally, I came back to myself. The experience I just described, I had 2 days ago. I remember looking down at myself on my bed before I re-entered my body. I had my hands over my face, and then I woke up. I know that none of this may sound believable, but I swear this is really happening to me, and I'm running out of ideas to deal with this. I've had people praying for me and my apartment blessed. I've had someone rebuke the spirits, and honestly, that did seem to work for a little while. I tried cleansing my apartment with white sage and reading Bible scriptures, but that only led to more experiences and more often. And I also experienced a scratch on my face when I was putting makeup on. I was looking in the mirror, and a scratch like an upside-down Y next to my nose suddenly appeared as I was putting my makeup on. It seemed like when I decided to fight back with the sage and the Bible readings, everything took a turn for the worse. Guys, I don't know what to do. I'm a Christian, and I'm staying very strong about this, but what am I supposed to do? I'm so fed up, I'm ready to just leave this apartment, despite the inconvenience it'll bring. These experiences are so real and so scary, it's really beginning to mess with me. I sleep with a Bible open next to my bed every day, and I pray continuously, but it just doesn't seem to be enough. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard, please give the video a thumbs up. Consider becoming a subscriber if you're not, and maybe even tell a friend about the channel. I certainly would appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to support what I'm doing, take that extra step. Find a link to my Patreon page in the description, and maybe even consider getting some Uncle Josh or Campfire Crew merchandise. There's a link to my storefront at tpublic.com in the description as well. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.